The following program is video supplemental instruction. VSI is brought to you by the Teaching Center, UF's Learning Support Center, www.teachingcenter.ufl.edu.
Hi, this is our second conditional statements video. In the first video we went over the rules of conditional statements, so if you want to check those out, you should check that video out. We also have the PDF available for these problems, which also include the rules, so you can print that out or just download it and read that while we do these. You could do the problems and then check your answers. So for this video we're just going to go over the problems. They're just a little bit harder than the first video's problems. So hopefully you can just try to do these yourselves and see if you can get the right answers. So the first problem reads, every law student is broke. So this is not only a conditional statement, but it's a factual statement. So you would write that as, well, let's go over that for a second because it's not an if-then. So to try and figure out which is the dependent and which is the independent, you have to understand the relationship in the statement. So if you're saying that every law student is broke, then what you're saying is that if you are a law student, then you are broke. Because it's not saying if you are broke, then you are a law student. Because again, you have to figure out what's the dependent and what's the independent. It's not, it's including every law student as being broke, and it doesn't necessarily imply that just because you're broke, you have to be a law student. You could be broke and be any number of occupations or any number of things, really. But if you're a law student, then you're going to be broke. So you would write that as, if you're a law student, then you're broke. Contrapositive of that is that if you are not broke, then you are not a law student. So, I mean, you have to really try to understand that relationship. And again, this goes into just that logical reasoning and practicing your own logical reasoning and figuring out the relationship in conditionals, because you have to figure out, you say if you're a law student, then you're broke. You have to really understand why it is that the law student is the dependent statement and the being broke is the independent statement. And again, it all goes down to that. I mean, just think about it. You can be broke and be any number of occupations. You can be broke and be anything, really. This statement doesn't tell you that, it doesn't put any restrictions on being broke. But it does say that if you're a law student, then you're broke. So being a law student depends on being broke. Because you can't be a law student without being broke. You can be broke without being a law student. So that's how that relationship works. Question 2 reads, if Ron goes to the park, then Janice and Chris go to the park. So this is a traditional if-then. We'll write it as if Ron goes to the park, then Janice goes to the park, and Chris goes to the park. The only different aspect of this question is that it has an and. So with ands and ors, you can either just write it out like that, you can write a little symbol. The only real thing to know about this is when it comes to the contrapositive, which you're going to flip and negate. But what do you do with the and and the or? Well, the and and the or are negations of each other. So if you have an and in the conditional, when you write out your contrapositive and you negate it, you're going to put an or instead. Likewise, if you have an or, you're going to put an and. So in this case, for the contrapositive, you're going to be flipping it. So it's going to be JP, if Janice goes to the park, Chris goes to the park, not and not. That's the flipping and negation of these two. For the and, you're going to put an or. So it's going to be if Janice does not go to the park or Chris does not go to the park, then Ron does not go to the park. And again, you can understand how that relationship works in logical terms, because for Ron to be at the park, Janice and Chris have to be at the park, both of them. Because if Ron's there, then Janice and Chris are going to be there. So Janice and Chris can be at the park and Ron not be at the park. They don't. Their being at the park doesn't depend on Ron being at the park. Ron being at the park depends on Janice and Chris being at the park. So if either one of them is not there, then Ron can't be there. And that's what the contrapositive states. So problem 3 reads, if Parker does not go to the movies, then neither Harold nor Tom goes to the movies. So if Parker does not go to the movies, then neither Harold nor Tom. Please. So if Parker does not go to the movies, then neither Harold nor Tom goes to the movies. Now, I realize it says nor, and I put an and. That's because in this case, it's what it's saying is neither nor is almost the same as saying and. If they wanted to say or, if they wanted to say that if Parker does not go to the movies, then if they wanted to say or instead of and, they would have said then Harold does not go to the movies, or Tom does not go to the movies. They would explicitly give an or. If they say neither nor, that's almost the same as saying and. So be aware of that, because that can be kind of tricky, and you can easily make a mistake on that one. So to negate, to create the contrapositive, we're gonna say if Harold goes to the movies, or Tom goes to the movies, then Parker goes to the movies. Number 4 reads, only if Tammy and Oscar are in room 5 is Roger in room 8. So this one's a little tricky, because your intuition is going to tell you that the if is at the beginning, because it says only if Tammy and Oscar are in room 5. But this is another one of those tricky situations, because the word only if, the statement only if, is really another word for then. So it's almost the opposite of the if. It's actually a then statement. Because if you think about it, again, if you think about it in logical terms and you reason through it, what it's saying is that Roger can only be in room 5 if Tammy and Oscar are in room... Roger can only be in room 8 if Tammy and Oscar are in room 5. So Roger is dependent on Tammy and Oscar, not the other way around. Tammy and Oscar can be in room 5 regardless of where Roger is. But Roger can only be in room 5 if Tammy and Oscar... Roger can only be in room 8 if Tammy and Oscar are in room 5. So let me just write this down so you can not get so confused by my rambling. So it's going to be Roger's in room 8. If Roger's in room 8, then Tammy and Oscar in room 5. And again, this one can be, when I was going over these in my practice, it did kind of confuse me a little bit, and I really had to think it through on logical terms, not just through the rules, through the if then the conditional statement rules, because I wouldn't get it just with the rules. I would have to actually understand what's going on, and I had to actually see how it is that Roger was dependent on Tammy and Oscar. Because if not, I wouldn't understand why it is that you would have to put one on one side over the other. So really try to understand which is the one that depends on the other, and that'll make it a lot easier. For the contrapositive, we would say that if Tammy he's not in room 5, or Oscar's not in room 5, then Roger's not in room 8. So for problem 5, it says Kyle will do his homework unless cartoons are on TV. Again, this is another one of those confusing ones because unless is a tricky word. What unless pretty much means is not if. So you find the if statement, the dependent statement, and you negate it essentially when you have an unless. This is 5 and 6. You're gonna see they're very counterintuitive to a certain point, but they absolutely work this way. I kind of didn't want to. I didn't want to do it the way I was taught to do it this way, and when I actually did, I would get the right answer on the logic games. So for number 5, unless Kyle will do his homework unless cartoons are on TV. So you know that Kyle doing his homework is the dependent statement because Kyle doing his homework depends on something. What does it depend on? It depends on cartoons being on TV. So when you take the unless and you negate the if, that pretty much leaves you with Kyle will not do his homework. Yeah, it'll leave you with Kyle will not do his homework if cartoons are on TV. I'm sorry, it leaves you with if Kyle does not do his homework, then cartoons are on TV. It's pretty much the way it'll work out. So if Kyle does not do his homework, then cartoons are on TV. This one's, these are really, when you're trying to work out even the reasoning and the logic with it, when you're looking at it, it can be a little difficult to see how that works because it's just there's not even a not statement in there, but you still have to put a negation here. Just try to understand the relationship because you know that Kyle doing his homework depends on cartoons being on TV. So what you do know is that if Kyle is not doing his homework, then cartoons are on TV, based on the statement. The unless is the key word that makes you negate the if statement. So you have to watch out for those. And the contrapositive of this, if cartoons are not on TV, and Kyle's doing his homework. Number 6 reads, George cannot be on the track team unless David is also on the track team. So you have another one of those unlesses. And in this one, you have to figure out which is your dependent statement, which is your independent. You're saying that George can't be on something unless something else happens. So George being on the track team is your dependent statement. So you know that's going to be on the left side. And the unless is going to make you negate that if statement. So it says George cannot be on the track team. So that's a negative statement. But when you negate a negative, you get a positive. So what you're saying is that if George is on the track team, then David is on the track team. And this one's even a little easier to see how that works out logically because you're pretty much saying that the only way George is going to be on the track team is if David's also on the track team. So in an if-then statement, you're saying that if George is on the track team, then you know that David is going to be on the track team. David is independent. David could be on the track team no matter what. He could be on the track team regardless of what happens to George. But you know that if George is going to be on there, for a fact, David is going to be on there. So that's how you kind of figure out how that works out logically. And your contrapositive, you know that if David is not going to be on there, then George is not going to be on there. So, again, it's very important for your own benefit, even if you can get the right answer without thinking about the logical relationship between the statements, you should always try to figure them out because it's good practice for your logical reasoning skills and it helps you out on the logic games section especially. So I would recommend to do that on all the conditional statements that practice that you do. If you guys have any questions, you can email us at lsat180uf@gmail.com, and be sure to check out the rest of our videos on the LSAT.
The Teaching Center, UF's Learning Support Center, www.teachingcenter.ufl.edu.